Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner, and I'm here with the man who's holding the reins on a ton of cosmic multiversity within the DC universe. It is Mr. Joshua Williamson. How are you, mate?
Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's always good to see you, brother. And you're here to talk to me about a very special event,
hmm
Shadow War Alpha. What can you tell me about
Yeah.
it, mate?
So Deathstroke assassinates Ra's al Ghul. I mean, that's really what kicks it off, right? I mean, it's right out the gate. It's we've been building this story that Deathstroke is building an army in the DCU, right? Like he's
Yeah.
he's kind of realizing who he really is, and that he's a villain. He's a bad person, right? He's not a hero. He's not an anti-hero. He's a bad person. As we're building that over here, and then in Robin, we've been building that Ra's al Ghul is kind of aware that like he needed change, right? He needed to change something about himself, that what he was doing wasn't working, and maybe the old ideas that he had were different. Like he's just changing as a person. And I think seeing Damien and seeing Damien kind of grow up, it sort of touched part of Raish and made him realize that he wanted to lead a different kind of life that he had led and just do things differently. Um, and Raish is going to present that idea to the world, and then Deathstroke kills him, and that's sort of a chain reaction to Talia sends her League of Assassins after Deathstroke, but not just Deathstroke. Anyone associated with Deathstroke, so his family, and we're working with him, which includes everyone in the Secret Society of Supervillains. It includes Black Canary, it includes Ravager, Respawn, like all these people who are associated with Deathstroke in any way, shape, or form are now going to be under attack by the League of Assassins. And that puts Batman and Robin in the middle because they have to figure out what's going on. Why did Deathstroke kill Ra's al Ghul? Can they stop all these assassins? Do you want to stop these assassins? It just creates all these kind of questions and builds a big mystery that has a big ending that will also connect to other stuff we're doing in the DCU.
Wow, it's one another one, and we were talking off camera a while ago about just the long series of big swings you guys have been taking,
Yeah.
like within the DC writing pool. What does it feel like to be able to play though with these supremely iconic
Yeah.
villain anti-hero characters?
Yeah, to play with the giant toys.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it, and I definitely have moments of like, oh, this is really cool. Like, I'll talk to James and Scott. Just when I was working with both of them, we would sit down every once in a while and talk about that. But the truth is, a lot of times we're so busy working on it that we don't have time to stop and think about it. Like when you're working on these books, there is a weight of responsibility, and there's also so many moving parts and so many people that depend on you that you don't get to be precious about it, and you don't get the time to sit and be in awe of it. You mostly just got to get back to work. It takes me a while to kind of take a step back and be like, oh, I did this and I got to play with these toys and do these things. Like every once in a while, you have these moments of like calm, and then you're just like, oh, cool, I got to write a Batman story. It's very brief, and then you're like, I gotta get back to work.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
so you don't get to take much time to sit there and think about how you're this architect and getting to play and move these toys around. It feels very natural, I guess. Like I've loved comics my whole life, and I've always been coming up with story ideas for these characters. Now I just get paid for it, so it's a very natural feeling to work on this stuff, but you don't get to have as much time to really, I think, appreciate it as much as you would want to.
I think that's a very efficient metaphor for everybody who works in a business where
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who aspire to doing that. And it's like any job. Some jobs are extremely cool, but by the same token, if you're sculpting Mount Rushmore, if you're painting the Sistine Chapel, if you're a man on a wire crossing a wire from one of the twin towers to the other,
Yeah.
when you're in the middle of it, all you're focusing on is the job at hand. The
Yeah.
enormity
Yeah.
of what you've done, it can only come later, right?
Yeah, it can only come later, and then you get to look at it as a big piece. You have to. It's hard, I think, sometimes to separate yourself, to have that kind of out of body experience, to look at it while you're in the middle of it. When I was working on Flash, the thing I used to always tell people was it was like I was running a marathon, and while I'm running this marathon, I don't have time to think about the marathon. I just got to keep running. And even then, as I was running, I was able to start figuring out things about myself as a writer, and just things about writing, and even in some places, things about the characters. But because Flash was a double ship book, so every 2 weeks, no matter what, I had to turn a Flash script in. I wasn't able to step off the marathon and look at it for a moment, take a deep breath and go, okay, I'm going to use what I learned, because you're just in it and you're just going. You got to keep on going and keep on going. But it is interesting. Like when Flash was over, I was able to take the things I learned from Flash and apply it to Infinite Frontier, apply it to Robin and Batman and Justice League Incarnate. Like I was able to, and Rogues, like I was able to take things I learned and start applying it over here. And that's when you start to appreciate it. I think we were able to look at it and go, oh, I figured these pieces out. I did this, and I got to play with this character. I think with Flash, like, no pun intended, even when you use it, like it went by in a flash. Like I remember, liking that character like my whole life, wanting to work on the Flash. And then when it came time to get that job, I remember thinking, oh, there's no way they're going to give me this job. And I was pitching for it, and they gave it to me. And then I had it for almost 5 years. And in that time of having that job, like living in it, I loved it. Like I loved riding the Flash every 2 weeks and getting to play with that mythology. But then now I'm like 2 years outside of it, and there are times where I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe it went like that. Like something I had wanted for so long. Yeah. It's the same thing with all books. I think once you're in it, you don't get to appreciate it as much. You don't get to take that step back and just love what you're doing for a moment. You can still love it, but it's a different experience. And then you get to the other side of it, and then you're like, oh man, it was over in a blink of an eye. Yeah. But then you can look back at the parts you're proud of, and then also the parts that you learned from, but with things like this, like getting into these big events, like working on the stuff that I'm doing with Justice League and the stuff now with Batman, with this Batman Robin Deathstroke crossover, this is a story I wanted to tell for a really long time. And so I put a lot of thought into it. And now that I'm here and that we're doing it, it's a lot of fun, because it's a very different kind of event. It's just a fun event with a lot of ninjas and fighting and, action. It's a lot more grounded than some of the other events I've worked on. It's a very simple premise, it's like, Deathstroke kills Ra's al Ghul, and Talia's out for revenge, so she sends her ninjas to kill him, and Batman has to stop those ninjas. Like it's all, it's a little easier to explain than some of the other events that I've worked on or I'm working on, but it's just it's a very fun story with a lot of ninjas in it. Like I feel bad for all the artists, because all the artists have had to do like so many ninjas. Every issue just has like an army of ninjas. I have to apologize to them at the beginning of every script where I'm just like, listen, there's a lot of characters in this, there's a lot of reference, but there's a lot of ninjas. In one of the issues, in the Alpha issue, there's a lot of ninjas in that too. But in the next issue, the Batman issue, Howard Porter, I gave him way too many ninjas to draw. And he did it. He drew all those ninjas. But it's also an emotional story too, because it involves family, and it has stuff about Batman and Damian and getting them back together and repairing that relationship. And so because of this happening, it puts the two of them together, because they're trying to figure out what really happened. They're trying to figure out, why would Deathstroke do this? Yeah. What was the motivation, what was really going on? And that unlocks a whole other mystery in the DCU. And you get to see the two of them sort of, go on a father-son adventure together, investigating something, right? Like I think the first half of it is so much action, and then you start getting into the actual investigation parts, and it's the two of them like doing interrogation scenes and flying around the bat plane, and getting to hang out as father and son on a mystery.
Yeah, and I think that it's a very cool thing. We talked on one of our other recent conversations about the concept of family being such an important and recurring motif within the DC universe. I'm curious, before you go, Josh, did you, or when it comes to these super iconic bad guy characters, for want of a better description, Deathstroke, Ra's al Ghul, Talia even, what are the other incarnations of those characters over the years that have spoken to you? When you think of them, which are your go-to versions outside of what you created?
I mean, my first introduction, because of my age, my first introduction to Ra's al Ghul and Talia was the animated series, and but I feel like it's pretty faithful, right? Like that cartoon is a very faithful, like this is the story, right? And so that was my first introduction to those characters, and so I kind of always come back around to them.
So do you hear Ra's al Ghul with David Warner's voice?
Yes, I do. His voice is great. Like his voice is really good. I also I'll show you this. I'll help you plug something. The thing that I look at all the time is this, which is the Batman the Demon trilogy hardcover.
Oh man, yeah. I love that.
This nails it.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
This to me nails like this is Ra's al Ghul and Talia.
Yeah.
Is this, I mean, I looked at a lot of stuff. I go back and I'll read some of Grant's work with Batman Inc. There's a lot of Ra's and Talia in there, but that hardcover is the one that I probably go back and look at the most. But I think when it comes to the voices of those characters, yeah, it's definitely the animated series. Like I definitely, because again, that was my first introduction, so that's always going to be one that I kind of look at the most for them.
So let me ask you a question, mate. Is your Deathstroke?
Yeah.
Is it Teen Titan? Is it Teen Titans Deathstroke? Is that where you go to with the voice on Deathstroke?
Oh, for me, you mean like in the cartoons and stuff? No, because again, my age, like I was already like in college and in my early 20s when that cartoon started.
Yeah.
So I never really watched it that much, right? Like, and so I don't really have that kind of connection with him in that way. To me, with him, it really is just going back and actually reading his series in the 90s was my first introduction to him. And then going back and rereading the Titan stuff. And then you get into like the 2000s where he was in Identity Crisis, and I think that again references back to the way he was in the beginning, and then him being just a villain in the Titans books was really my introduction. But look at Christopher Priest. I think that when Christopher Priest took over Deathstroke with Rebirth, he did such character work with the character, right? Like, and I think he really created an identity with him, and so I look at that a lot. I looked a lot at what Christopher Priest did, because I think he did some really in-depth storytelling with Slade and his character and the family, with like Ravager and Jericho, and in a way that I think hadn't gone deep in a long time. So a lot of the voice I have for him is that, but at the same time with his character, I wanted to do something different with it in a way with the Deathstroke Inc. book, and that's what we're building to. But it's interesting, I wrote a scene with him that is not in the Deathstroke Inc. book. It is something else coming out down the line. I wrote a scene with him, and it's like one of my favorite scenes I've ever done with him. And it is very much the mean, conniving Titans character that Wolfman created with George Perez. Like, it's very much that person again. And so looking back really at Wolfman and Perez, I think the stuff what they did with his character and how he was, I look at that a lot with the stuff I write with him. It just depends sometimes. What's on the story you're telling too, and what's happening with him in that story. And a part of what's been going on in Deathstroke Inc. is that Deathstroke is essentially going through a midlife crisis. I'm not sure how to put it, but that's really what it is. And you have this character going through a midlife crisis, it changes who he is. And so I wrote him from that perspective.
I think that sounds fascinating. There's no better inspiration, of course, for Deathstroke than Wolfman and Perez. I can think of few characters that were so fully formed in the first appearance. So in those early Titans issues, Deathstroke is really a breath of fresh air for the DC universe at that point, and for a DC universe villain, because he's really something else that you haven't seen before, and it's all there on the page, as you say.
Yeah, it's interesting to go back and read that stuff, how quickly that stuff came together. Because I think when I think about it, sometimes I feel like there's gaps, right, in the storytelling in terms of like it went on longer than I thought it did, right? Like, oh, this was like a 6-issue arc or a year-long story, and then you go back and read his first appearance stuff, and it's like, oh no, this stuff with him and the original Ravager, his son Grant, this is all right here at the beginning. It's right here, and I mean, obviously you can tell like they obviously had a much bigger plan with him, and they told a much bigger story. But it is interesting how much he became a part of the mythology of the Titans so quickly. And he's the Titans' greatest enemy, right? I mean, that's, period.
There can be no doubt. Yeah, he's in a super league of his own.
Yeah. I mean, he's such an interesting character with that. And it's fascinating how he's gone through all these changes over the years. But again, that's all part of the stuff we're telling with him, is that like, him going through essentially a midlife crisis and then realizing like, oh no, I'm a bad person. That's who I am, and then embracing it. And that's the stuff that we're doing with him. So it'll be interesting to see what people think when we get to the end of the story I'm telling with him, because the story we're telling with him is far from over, and is very important to the stuff we're doing this year. So yeah, it's gonna be very interesting to see what people think once we get there.
Well, I can't wait. I can't think of a better introduction to the beginning of this story, and that's Shadow War Alpha, which you can order from the links attached to this conversation. And Josh, I'm looking forward to you coming back on and telling us about some more of your plans for this overarching narrative as it develops throughout 2022.
I'm excited. Excited. We'll talk soon.
You take care, brother. I'll see you soon. Thanks for joining us.
You too.
Cheers, mate.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye. If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.